Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lauren, and this is Garrett. And we are both group leaders as well as welcome volunteers in the Dallas-Fort Worth chapter. We will be co-leading this presentation today, so feel free to put any questions in the chat, and we'll be happy to answer them at the end for you. We're excited to present to you today because our chapter has put a lot of work into the onboarding process, and we've made enormous progress in the past couple of years in building out our welcome team and have grown from a very small chapter to one that is now really thriving. We could easily talk about this for more than an hour, but we hope this brief presentation provides a helpful summary and sparks some ideas for how you can improve your own chapter's onboarding. So we're going to start off by talking through why we feel our onboarding works, and then we'll give a brief overview of our onboarding process and discuss some of the tools that we use that make us more effective as a team.
So our onboarding doesn't work just because we have good onboarding process, a well-defined structure to the team, and dedicated and effective welcome volunteers. We do have those things, but combined, that's about half the picture. The rest of it is being thoughtful and intentional about the chapter that new prospects are being onboarded into and developing a deep understanding of how our onboarding process fits into that. We are actively assessing and tweaking our onboarding process all the time. We challenge ourselves and each other to identify weaknesses in the process and eagerly look forward to identifying these opportunities to improve our approach. We get feedback from multiple sources. New prospects, we talk to them about how the onboarding process went. Our welcome volunteers or onboarders talk to them. We just have a culture of asking, each other and how is stuff working. We do the same with our onboarders, our welcome volunteers. We have 2 meetings a month for these welcome volunteers. We'll talk to you about that later, and we're always asking them how stuff is going. Also, we have a few things that we can measure more directly, such as our action, how things are going in the action tracker, how things are going in terms of getting new prospects onto chapter meetings and that kind of thing. We also, in our chapter, have this culture of just being excited to build something better. We take pride in our work, and we actively strive towards creating the best possible experience for volunteers. We see culture and community starting at the very beginning of someone's journey with CCL, and we want that to be as good as possible and strike while the iron is hot. And we want to talk a minute about just kind of holistic engagement. We see the chapter itself as an onboarding tool. When you're onboarding new prospects, one of the main things you are doing is selling the experience of being in your chapter to them. So we want to talk about making the chapter sellable for a minute. One thing that people are looking for when they join is a sense of belonging. How can we create that sense of belonging? Well, can people see other people like themselves? Can the new prospects see someone like themselves in the group? That's a hint. Focus on diversity. Also, is the atmosphere warm and welcoming? What is the venue like, right? What is the Zoom meeting like? What is the presenter like? Are they charismatic? That kind of thing. We also do things like sending stickers to new volunteers when they join to their home address. We want to make them feel welcome. We also want to specifically invite them to things. People want to feel specifically invited. People will naturally feel like an outsider to a new group, and we have to fight that. And also, we build friendships. So we are just building so many friendships in our group, and my best friends started as my new prospects. Also, people need a clear path to involvement. So they need a clear picture of how the chapter is structured and who to go to get involved with opportunities. They need volunteer opportunities that are suited to people who don't know that much about CCL yet. And they need a setting of expectations. So they need to understand that they don't need to look for the perfect opportunity. They need to just pick something, and we're going to train them and we're going to make it fun. And then also they need to feel like the group is credible. And so when someone joins a new group, they're trying to make a judgment call on whether that group is a good use of their time. And so I think Lauren's going to talk to you here in a minute just about some more of that.
Yeah, so part of selling the experience is building volunteer confidence in 3 main things: carbon pricing, the EICDA, and Citizens Climate Lobby as an organization. So first and foremost, people need to understand that carbon pricing is popular and effective. Many new prospects do not realize that carbon pricing is as effective as it is as a policy. And ultimately, if we want them to stay, they need to see that we're doing the most effective thing for the climate and they're a part of that. In addition, people need to understand that the EICDA is popular in Congress and has credible research behind it, showing that it will quickly and effectively reduce emissions. And lastly, people need to see that CCL is a credible values-based organization that can move the needle. One thing we consistently emphasize is CCL's core values so that new prospects understand why CCL is different from other environmental organizations and other volunteer opportunities that they could choose instead. And so within this bigger picture, it's really important that new volunteers know that your chapter has a plan to engage meaningfully in CCL's efforts, regardless of where your chapter is right now. So make sure that your welcome volunteers can confidently articulate these things.
Yeah, and our chapter is a big chapter at this point, but we didn't always start that way. There are certain things that you can do to really help your engagement at any size. So when we started, we were at the brink of collapse. I was personally reaching out to every new prospect. I personally had a welcome call with each of them, and I personally worked to help each and every one of them find their place in the chapter. And I had to work really, really hard, but that work paid off, and now we're doing great, and we're still growing, and no one person has to do everything. So one thing you can do at any size is to right size your events. You can make a chapter of any size look like a lively group of climate activists in the right venue. Think of how a new prospect would perceive 5 volunteers huddled in the corner of a large conference room versus in the corner of a nice coffee shop. And also, people expect less formality of smaller groups and more formality of larger ones. You need to set expectations and do it in an honest way, keep an upbeat tone, and let people know, no matter how big your chapter is, that you need their help. That is always important. It's especially important when you're smaller. I also like to think of volunteers a little bit like money, right? I mean, you have to have them to get more of them. And just like going from no money to some money is a lot harder than going from a lot of money to a lot more money, volunteers are the same way. When you're just starting out and it's just you, or you just have maybe 1 or 2 people that are helping doing all the work, it feels impossible. But once you get those first 5 to 10 dedicated volunteers, everything is going to get a lot easier. You have to get over that hump, and it does get easier. And then finally, no matter what size you're at, you need to commit to growth and organization. It is okay to be a smaller chapter, but it's not okay to be complacent. We can't forget how important our mission is and that we need massive numbers to complete it. Anytime our commitment to growth and improvement starts to waver, we consider all of the people in Dallas-Fort Worth who are dealing with climate anxiety, just like we did when we joined, whose lives could be changed by finding a community like Citizens Climate Lobby. We want to be that outlet and that opportunity for them. The way we see it, we can relax when everyone in Dallas-Fort Worth who would ever want to volunteer with us is an active volunteer in our chapter. The photos on this slide are used with heavy creative license, but it's all volunteers from our chapter, and it's pretty close to the kind of numbers that we were seeing in mid-2019 compared to the end of 2019. We grew like crazy. Also, I want to talk just a minute about Slack. You've probably heard of this, but maybe you haven't. Why is this important for new volunteers? Well, it's important to have a single place for your CCL stuff. When I first joined CCL, I immediately realized that if I didn't create a separate email account, I was going to miss out. Most new volunteers are not going to spend the time to do that. And Slack or something like it solves that problem. Email doesn't really cut it. Things get lost in email. There are no notifications, and someone has to maintain a list. CCL Community for this purpose doesn't quite cut it either. Many people just use it like email. It's good for really active volunteers that are actively checking it, but there's friction in creating all the necessary groups to really divide things into topics that your chapter is working on. It's not really, doesn't work too well on mobile, and it just kind of doesn't seem to resonate well with younger people. And then also with Slack, anyone can learn it. We have people at all ages and levels of technical ability using Slack in our chapter. Also, be aware that while you may not see the point of using something like Slack, some people, especially younger ones, are going to be very, very hard to engage without it, or something like it. I think it caught on in our chapter because we were highly persistent about getting people on it. We trained people on how to use it, and we integrated it into our onboarding, and we wouldn't shut up about it until it was fully embraced. We invested and we continue to reap massive benefits to this day, and our engagement and onboarding would have all been so much harder without it or something like it.
So hopefully that provides some helpful context. Now we'll talk more in detail about our actual onboarding process. So first, I want to quickly tell you about the various roles on our welcome team, and then I'll explain how they interact. So first, the new prospect. Most of you probably know this is the new person being onboarded into the chapter. And then we have allocators. So the allocator is the first person who reaches out to a new prospect once they've signed up via CCL or showed interest. And so they're the one that offers a welcome call and then connects that new prospect with an onboarder once they've expressed interest in talking to someone. And then, so then we have our onboarders, and they're the people who have the welcome calls with the new prospects and then nurture them into the chapter over time. Onboarders usually have very specific personalities. They're outgoing, good at communicating complex ideas, have a personality that inspires trust in a new prospect, and ultimately has a desire to understand CCL. And then lastly, we have our welcome team lead, and this is the person that makes sure that everything is running smoothly. They meet with the allocators and onboarders, watch to ensure that new prospects are flowing through the pipeline, and ensure that every new prospect is getting contacted. One of the key characteristics of our onboarding process is that we separate the task of reaching out to a new prospect and getting them to agree to a call from the task of having that call with them and nurturing them into the full involvement with the chapter. So that's the difference between allocator and onboarder that I mentioned. So we recognize these as two different skill sets and workflows, and separating them has made our process far more effective and created more manageable workloads for the volunteers involved. And our chapter has a welcome team meeting twice a month for our onboarders. We encourage allocators to attend, but this is optional for them. We find that if they attend, it does help them to bond with the onboarders and stay in tune with the impact of their work. And this meeting serves three main purposes. First, to give the onboarders an opportunity to discuss their new prospects and share ideas on how to engage them. And then also to keep onboarders accountable for keeping up to date with their new prospects, since they're expected to report on the status of each of their new prospects during this meeting. And then lastly, it provides a time for the welcome team lead to update the onboarders on any process changes or other information that they need to know to be as successful as possible. And the allocators also have their own meeting, check-in with the welcome team lead. This is normally a shorter call, again, just to have a touch point.
Yeah, and so what does it actually look like when we're reaching out to new prospects? Well, the one thing that I will emphasize is that we are reaching out frequently. Our welcome allocator is monitoring the roster. They're reaching out all the time, more than once a week. We think it's important to reach out more than once a week because this demonstrates to a new prospect that we're an active and credible organization. We also don't bet at all on email. Since most emails will never get looked at, we send a text message to anyone who has opted into texting, and we'll tell you in a minute how to see that. We also make up to 2 attempts. We don't just try once. So if they've allowed us to text, we'll text or we'll email, and then we'll follow up with an email if they don't respond the first time. Also, we have a rule: nobody falls through the cracks. Every single person who joins our chapter gets contacted and tracked by the allocator. And then the welcome team lead monitors to make sure that there's no gaps in that coverage. And so what happens to get the new prospect connected to that person who's going to talk to them and lead them into CCL? Well, the allocator posts in the welcome team Slack channel that a new prospect wants to be assigned an onboarder. The allocator doesn't choose the onboarder, but the whole group of onboarders, those people that are having that welcome call and nurturing them afterwards, they're all in that channel, and they just take people on as they're able to. And the welcome team manager is, again, making sure that this is happening. The onboarder will then meet with a new prospect. So our welcome calls are not probably very different than a lot of the welcome calls in your chapter. But one thing that we do emphasize is we make sure that they get a few key things. The first thing is we get them added to Slack right then and there. We make sure that they are plugged in. And so, whatever your communication platform is for your chapter, whatever they need, calendar, Slack, whatever you're using, make sure that they know the best practices to stay plugged in. We do that. And then also, we consider this welcome call to be the beginning of the onboarder's work with the new prospect, not the end. This is the start of a relationship. We also have some standards that we stick to. We have some documents we use to describe our process and how we do stuff, but we kind of see that as a guide. We want our onboarders, we want our welcome volunteers to innovate and come up with better ways of doing stuff all the time. But this is just kind of outlines the basic stuff to make sure we're not forgetting things.
And so after that initial call, the onboarder moves the new prospect to what we call the nurturing phase. So this includes following up with them regularly to see how things are going for them, inviting them to chapter meetings and other events, and encouraging them to take on volunteer opportunities. So we want to make sure to invite them to events because, as Garrett said, that personal invite goes a long way. Having a trusted messenger is really important. And we want to make sure it's easy for new prospects to both find out about events and want to go to them. In addition, we're really trying to help them make those connections early on. So new volunteers can be shy. We want to be sure to introduce them to multiple people and opportunities. It's good to get them involved in one main thing, but we don't want to bet their engagement on our first guess for what that one main thing is. So we try to expose them to multiple opportunities early on. And then lastly, we want to figure out what kind of learning excites the new prospect in CCL. And so the onboarder is not going to be the person who will run every event and teach the new prospect everything there is to know, right? That's what the rest of our chapter is for. And so finding out who and what the new prospect is interested in is ideal. And the onboarder formally continues to build this relationship with their new prospects for up to 2 months. And we really love seeing all of the friendships in our chapter that have formed that started as onboardings. And so part of building those connections with new prospects is sharing our new prospects. So we've discovered that sometimes the best person to connect with a new prospect is actually not the person who is their onboarder. We all have different personalities, right? So we encourage onboarders to intentionally engage with any new prospect who they think they can connect with, regardless of who they're assigned to. And we often talk about these connections as a team to see how they're forming and to talk about it together as a team. So this approach really makes the relationship building process more collaborative and ultimately stronger, ensuring that new prospects find their best fit within the chapter and feel like they belong. And in addition, the more connections that a new prospect builds with experienced volunteers, the better. So sharing new prospects helps facilitate that and gives new volunteers more people they can trust and turn to.
So let's talk for a minute about how we use various technology tools to serve the needs of the welcome team. All the concepts and processes that we've talked about so far could be adapted to work with sticky notes, a whiteboard, email, phone calls. But using some more focused tools has really helped to make our welcome process easier and more effective. And using good tools can help make your own onboarding more effective as well. If you're not a technical person, I've got some great news for you. All of these things that we're going to talk about have video tutorials and help documentation. A lot of our welcome volunteers are not all that tech savvy, but they stuck with it and they learned and they're doing great with them now. Anybody can learn this stuff with some patience, persistence, and just a little bit of curiosity. So I want to first talk to you about the chapter roster. So this is probably familiar to many of you. Again, we mentioned earlier that our allocator watches this roster. They check it every other day or so. And we can easily see new prospects pretty frequently by looking at the details tab and sorting such that newest contacts are at the top. We don't have to wait for a weekly email. We're looking at the roster to see that information. Why do we look at the details tab? Why not the new members tab? Well, one key reason. The details tab gives us the text message opt-in column. Why is that important? Well, the text message opt-in column is how we know whether it's okay to text a new prospect or if we have to just try email. There's also the source column. And the source column can sometimes give us some really valuable information. And one of my favorite things about this is if you see it say online dash something, you know that it's probably a 20 to 35-year-old person who is likely tech savvy and probably leans progressive just because they came from one of a few different online sources. Also, we talked about Slack a minute ago. I won't go into a ton of detail about it right now, but our welcome team uses this as well. And the main reason our welcome team uses this is that it makes a really good way to notify people. So if you see here, Madhushri has said, hey, Derek would like to speak to a welcome volunteer. He's free on Friday. And Lauren is saying, hey, Madhushri, please assign to me. And this gives us notifications. It gives us a really good way to do this. It gives us a specific place to organize this. It works so much better than email. It works so much better than CCL community for this purpose, just because it gives us that really focused place and a single and notifications and all that. And we can set it to be private just for our welcome volunteers. So it's really useful for that.
So Asana is the main tool we use to actually organize our onboarding process. It's a task management software that helps our team track progress with new prospects, keeps all of us on the same page, and ensures that no new prospect falls through the cracks. So as you can see here, each new prospect gets a card. They're considered a task in the software, and so they're assigned to whichever onboarder volunteered to take them. And then ultimately, prospects move from section to section throughout the onboarding process based on their status. So you can see the main statuses are making contact attempts, wants, welcome, volunteer, onboarder, pre-meeting, and post-meeting and nurturing. So making contact attempts, that's the allocator's job, right? When they're reaching out and seeing if they want a meeting. Once they want a meeting, then they're moved to the wants, welcome, volunteer, onboarder section. And that's when the welcome volunteer onboarders step in to take on that new prospect and then move them along once they've met with them and are starting to nurture them. And so ultimately, because Asana is clean, concise, and well organized, it's so much easier than using a spreadsheet, and it lets everyone see who is working with whom and lets us visually see what's happening with the team's workload. So here's what Garrett's screen looks like after he's been assigned to a prospect, Jackie James, and has finished his welcome call with her. Now we'll take a look at a few different parts of the card. So here on the left, we have subtasks, and then on the right, comments. So the subtasks let us keep track of important onboarding steps for the new prospects, such as getting them on CCL Community, making sure they take their climate advocate training and get on Slack. And then on the right side, as you can see, we also keep notes about our welcome calls in the comments on the card. So other people on the team can ask questions here or make notes. For example, someone else may interact with Garrett's new prospect and hear that they're interested in tabling. So they could make a note on this card so that everything is in one place. And then a lot of people prefer to see their tasks as a more traditional list instead of the cards. So Asana lets you do that, switch between views. So it's super versatile for different people. And here's a screenshot of our welcome team's Asana project. We blurred out certain things for privacy reasons, but you can kind of get the idea. In conclusion, you need a good tool to manage your new prospects. And in our opinion, it's not a spreadsheet and it's not the roster. So if you're interested in talking more about an application like Asana or any of the tools we've talked through today, we'd be happy to talk further with you about that.
Thank you, Lauren. And here is our contact information. We know this is a ton of information. And like I said, we could talk for a long time about this. So if you want to chat more, you're interested in following up on this, feel free to post here and then, feel free to shoot us an email and we will turn it over to Ellie to read off the questions.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Okay, we're going to go quick because there's great questions. People are interested in how many people land on your new prospect list, and then how many of those turn into people wanting that phone call with your onboarder. Talk to us about sort of the numbers there.
It varies. Lauren, can you take that one?
Yeah, I'm not going to have a really good estimate on how many actually come through, but we have quite a few every week that are getting added to Asana under making contact attempts. Recently, I would say it's slowed down, but we've gone through periods where we have like 5 or 6 a week that are asking for calls. So it can really just kind of vary on the season. Yeah, so I would say recently it's been a little bit slower, but when I first started, it was quite consistent.
And if you would say 10 people were getting the allocator, were on the allocator's list, how many of those 10 landed onto an onboarders list?
I would say just off the top of my head, I would estimate maybe 30%, maybe like 3 to 5 people, 30 to 50%. Yeah. I don't know, Garrett, would you say that's about?
Yeah, that sounds right to me. You know, a third to maybe half of them, sometimes more, depends on what's going on and why they joined.
Okay, cool. Now talk about how many people do you have helping with the allocator and the onboarder tasks, like maybe related to how many names come your way?
We've added a few allocators recently. So we have, I believe, 3 to 5 people. We're trying to fill a couple more positions with that. And then we have about the same number of onboarders at the moment. Some of us are more active than others. just because of capacity. But that's about how many people we have for each role.
So you have about 6 altogether, 6 to 7 on your onboarding team. Let's see, what about inactive members? Do you do any work sort of going over names that have been sitting on your list for a while?
Yeah, so we actually recently started up a re-engagement team that's very similar to our welcome team. So that's a more recent effort. Essentially, we're trying to re-engage folks who have become either less active or completely inactive. So that's a completely separate team and list, but the process looks similar. It does involve Asana, and it involves reaching out individually to those people and trying to set up welcome calls with them to see if they're interested in getting involved again, especially right now because of how important it is for us to, engage as many people as we can.
Oh, I love that. All right, so somebody's sharing that they lost a bunch of their leadership due to COVID. My goodness, I don't know if those were deaths or just the COVID whole experience was overwhelming. So I'm so sorry to hear that. What advice might you give for helping to fill leadership roles? And this would be the same for just a small chapter where you've got your group leader kind of struggling alone and looking for how to build a bit of a leadership team. How do you do that through onboarding?
Can I take that one?
Yeah.
Yeah. So through onboarding specifically, one thing I like to do is give new prospects a tour of the chapter. So if I'm working with a new prospect, instead of like just stressing over like, man, what would be the perfect opportunity for them? I recognize that that's a trap and that they may not know what the perfect opportunity is for them. And there is no perfect opportunity for anybody. And so I will say, hey, what am I working on? Like, here, just let's just go hang out and talk about what I'm working on. And then most of the time that person might get interested. I will say that like the volunteers that are super active, and just to put her on the spot, Lauren is one of them. the volunteers that are super active and that do really well aren't people that started out picky. They're people that said, I want to do whatever it takes. And I'm here to work. I am like, what you just tell me what you need. When you hear somebody say that, that is like you may be about to get a really good new volunteer, and you need to strike while the iron is hot. And one other thing, it's not quite onboarding related, but something I've noticed is that sometimes I know that like chapters will sort of kind of balkanize themselves a little bit in terms of, there may be other chapters nearby and they won't think like, hey, why don't we do a joint event? Because people want to go where people are. And so if you can reach out to other chapters in the area, if you have those other chapters, and do joint events with them, that will make your meetings look more full. It'll make people want to connect better with the group, because to people, our chapter covers an entire metro area. It used to be that there were 7 chapters in the area. And it's so much easier to organize and to engage people and to make people feel like, again, like the organization is credible when they join a chapter and there's more faces on the meeting. So that's how I would answer that.
Nice. How do you tell when you're an onboarder how much that new prospect wants to hear from you? Like, you don't want to annoy them. How often do you check in? How do you kind of sense that?
Yeah. So the kind of the way that I look at that is people join a volunteering organization to volunteer. We train our welcome volunteers to not be shy about that kind of thing. We train them to make the ask. We want them to use their best judgment, and invariably they're able to do that and detect when someone is kind of like maybe not wanting to be so active. But when in doubt, we train them to make the ask, because if someone is offended or upset because we're asking them to do something when they have said, I want to volunteer, there's only so much we can do about that.
Right. I love that. So we're not trying to get people to sit and listen to a meeting. People have joined us because they want to volunteer. And our job is to say, come and help me, like you were saying.
Don't be an audience, be an activist.
Right. So someone asks, people don't pick up phone calls when we call them. What is your experience in folks responding to phone calls?
That has been our experience too. We send a text message, and if we can, and then we'll send an email. I have heard other groups that are successful with phone calls. That may depend on the demographic in your area and the local culture. So I'm not saying to rule it out, but it hasn't worked well for us either.
Oh my, I think we have to wrap up, but I do want to say I put in the chat for everyone the onboarding action team, and this is a repeat performance. Garrett gave this talk, and we have it recorded on the onboarding action team. We meet monthly. We also have the resources that Dallas Fort Worth uses. So you can see what was startling to me was that allocator text or email that they send, or both, is very short. Hey, welcome to our list. Do you want to hear from someone to tell you a little bit more about what you can do in our chapter? That's it. It wasn't full of like, click this link, go to this training. No. It was one invitation. The person says, yes, I'm interested, or they don't respond. So please go look at those resources that these wonderful folks have put together for us, and, copy, modify, keep us posted on the onboarding action team. Would love to have you join and come and learn some more. And Lauren and Garrett have put their emails in there. They are happy to share and to mentor you guys as you build this out. So round of applause for them. So thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Citizens Climate Lobby's training program. You can tune into more episodes anywhere podcasts are available. Inspired by what you heard today? Join Citizens Climate Lobby to advocate for bipartisan climate solutions. Go to community.citizensclimate.org to find more trainings, resources, your local chapter, national action teams, discussion forums, and more. Be sure to like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and Instagram @CitizensClimate. We also invite all of our listeners to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiration. And together, we are creating the political will for a livable world.